go ahead and call to order the Equity and Partnerships Subcommittee of the Oregon Education Investment Board. We have a lot of members missing this morning due to weather, conflicts, the legislative session that's calling people away. But we have our chair, Nicole Maher, on the phone. You there, Nicole?
I'm here.
Do we have anyone else on the phone? Okay, it's a party of one. But we're going to go ahead because we've got folks here with important information, and I think we can invite folks in the audience to engage in the conversation as well. And we will make sure that the materials and discussion notes get conveyed to the other members of the subcommittee so that they can benefit from this discussion. But I'm going to go ahead and again, I'm going to be chairing for Nicole since she's on the phone. But I want to do, first off, I want to introduce you to David Martinez, who is our newest staff member at the OEIB. His title will be Secondary Transitions and Student Engagement Director. And so we're very, very excited. We are designing the kind of ends of the spectrum at OEIB. So you met Serena, I think, last week, who is our Early Transitions Community and Equity Director, and then we've got David. David is going to be staffing this subcommittee. We had originally asked Serena to do it, but her plate is overflowing with early literacy initiatives, and so we've asked David to help and take the lead. He has a background in post-secondary education. I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about himself.
Well, again, I'm David Martinez, and I'm excited to be here. It's my second week with the OEIB. My background primarily has been in post-secondary. I worked at Portland State University, Western Oregon University, Willamette, and Linfield. And a lot of my roles have been around admissions, around outreach, multicultural programs, and student services. Most recently, I was at Portland Community College, and so I was there for 5 years working around outreach and orientation. And so my most immediate experience has been actually visiting high schools and working with parents and families to provide information about post-secondary options and the value of community college and the value of the Oregon University system, and also looking at the private institutions in Oregon. I'm a native Oregonian from Eastern Oregon, Ontario, Oregon, and I was also the first member of my family to graduate high school and graduate college. So I definitely have a commitment and a passion for students and families to be successful in post-secondary. I did take a break to do some policy work. I worked for one of the Multnomah County Commissioners in early 2000. So I'm excited to bring all my skills, and I look forward to working with this subcommittee as well as other partners in the state.
Thank you, David. So we're very excited about our team at OEIB. So,
I just want to echo that. This is Nicole. David, we're so fortunate to have you. You're going to be a wonderful addition.
Thank you.
So we're going to go ahead and start with item 2, which is the presentation on our very recently released 2013 graduation and dropout data. Because this committee has an interest in thinking about our students all across the pipeline, and in particular our students who are out of school or who may need other pathways to be re-engaged, I've asked Doug Costi and Isabella Jacoby from the Oregon Department of Education to come and provide you a snapshot of the most recent data that I think will be very important to inform your work. So come on up. Nicole, you should have received the PowerPoint by email.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Whitney and Nicole. For your record, Doug Costi, Assistant Superintendent at the Oregon Department of Education, and I'm also filling in for the... I thought it was me. For the manager of accountability and reporting, who we're in the process, that position we're in the process of hiring for. So With me today is Isabella Jacoby. She's a research analyst, the individual responsible for developing the report card for the statewide report card, and is very knowledgeable.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I can't hear, I can barely hear anything at all.
Oh, is this
Hold on one second.
Nicole?
We're going to move you closer. Thank you for interrupting, Nicole.
Nicole, how is this?
Better.
I'll try to talk in my loud voice, which I do have one. What we're going to do is, you've got a slide deck in front of you, and we made copies for the audience. And it is a pretty detailed overview of the cohort graduation, completer, and dropout rate. So in the interest of time, we're going to focus on a few slides and draw your attention probably more to how the cohort graduation and dropout rate are calculated, and then toward the end, and we plan on spending about 15 minutes going through this, we're going to show you some more disaggregated data with respect to the latest cohort dropout rate. What I do want to tell you in advance is, given there has been a change to the dropout rate calculation this year, we don't really have what we feel would be comparable data going back. Even though we do have previous year's dropout rates, there was a discrepancy. So we're using this as a baseline, and we're going to drill in. The report you're going to see today is going to look at disaggregated students and where they're at and when they drop out. So with that, Isabella is going to walk you through a few slides to ground you with respect to how the graduation rate and cohort rates are calculated, and then get into some of the data results.
All right, we have three main rates that we produce: the graduation rate, the completer rate, and then the dropout rate. The most important thing to remember is that the dropout rate and the cohort rate are calculated separately, and they aren't necessarily inverses or related to each other. We'll get more into how those are calculated in a moment.
Okay, I'm going to do a sound check for Nicole. How are you hearing Isabella okay, Nicole?
I still can't hear.
You might want to just sit next to me. I hate to do that to you, but let's just pull this table up closer, just to be safe. Let me just flip this down. Yeah,
All right, Nicole, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, so the first rate we have is the cohort graduation rate. We include only regular diplomas as graduates in this rate, and we calculate it by following a group of students from the first year that they're enrolled in any high school grade anywhere in the country through 4 years and then 5 years to calculate the 4-year cohort rate and the 5-year rate. And we adjust for students moving into or out of the system to form what's called the adjusted cohort, which is the denominator for these rates. And then the number of students in that adjusted cohort who earn a regular diploma within 4 years or within 5 years of their first enrollment in high school are counted as graduates. We also have the completer rate. The completer rate is very similar to the cohort rate in terms of how the denominator is calculated. The only difference is that we count more credentials than just the regular diploma. So it includes all of the diploma types as well as students who earn GEDs as completers. But it does not include students who earned an alternative certificate. The calculation is fairly straightforward. It's just the number of students who earned the specific outcome within the 4 or 5 year time period divided by the number of students in the adjusted cohort. So here's a chart to demonstrate which credentials are included in each of the rates. Again, regular diplomas in the grad rate, and then regular modified extended or adult diplomas or GEDs in the completer rate. The other rate we calculate is the NCES dropout rate. This is federally defined, and it is very different from the cohort rate. So although they tend to move together, they're not inverses. It's a single year rate. So we count all the students who dropped out within a single school year, including those who completed a prior school year and were expected to return and did not. And then we divide that by the total number of high school students who are enrolled in grades 9 through 12 on the first school day of October in that same school year. So this rate doesn't consider how long a student has been in high school, and it doesn't consider whether a student has dropped out in prior years. It's just a count of dropout events in a single year divided by that membership number. So now we...
So I'm going to slip through these slides fairly quickly because these are just the graduation rates, which have been publicized quite a bit in the past week or two. Okay, that right there.
Okay, so the previous slides were longitudinal summaries.
Tell Nicole where we're at on the slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
The previous slides were longitudinal summaries of data for various disadvantaged subgroups, and now we've moved on to the cohort continuing enrollment slide. So this is looking at the percent of students of the students who did not earn a credential by the 4 or 5 years, how many of them continued and how many of them were non-completers or dropouts. If you're interested in a further breakdown of this, we split out the cohort by all of the different outcomes that students achieved in the media file. And this is one of the ones that people find most interesting. So you can see that among these groups, it varies by subgroup, but typically 30 to 45-ish% of students who didn't complete are continuing for that 5th year. And many of those students do complete in the 5th year, which is why we calculate a 5-year cohort rate to include those outcomes as well. We've also looked at, of those students who are non-completers or dropouts, what year did we last see them? So you can see that as we approach the mark at which students would be on time to graduate, more and more students drop out or are otherwise removed from the system until we hit that 4th year, and then there's a smaller number of students that continue for a 5th year and drop out during that year. And this is looking at the 4 cohorts for which we have 5 years of data. We also have one additional cohort that we only just published a 4-year rate on, and I didn't include them because they're still in the process of their 5th year right now.
So just as a data point here, as a reference point, you'll see percentages on the left axis, the vertical. That is based on a cohort of about, 45 to 50,000 kids.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get a frame of reference in terms of the number of individual kids. If you take the 0.02 or whatever that percentage is times the 40 to 50,000 kids, gives you a rough number of the count of kids that we're looking at in that category.
So these are this year's dropout rates, again, by some common disadvantaged subgroups. We changed our methodology, as Doug mentioned, this year, so we don't have longitudinal data on this slide, but you can see the disparities between the different groups just within the 1 year's rate. We also have this data by which grade the students were enrolled in at the time that they dropped out. And again, this is within a single year and not looking at a cohort over multiple years as the previous slide was. But you can see, again, students drop out at a much higher rate in the higher grades.
So that is the overview of the grad and dropout rate data. So we thought we would stop there and see if that spurred some questions, concerns, comments, or requests for additional information.
Yeah, this is Nicole. I'm always concerned that we don't look at dropout in 7th and 8th grade. I have a long history of working with communities that have very high dropout rates in 7th and 8th grade, and so they're not counted in the original cohort, and that's a significant issue in our Latino, our Southeast Asian, our Slavic and Native American communities, and I just don't see any of that addressed in this whatsoever.
Actually, per federal requirements, we do have a 7th and 8th grade dropout rate, but due to limited district staff, we asked them to focus on the 9 through 12 rates when validating. So I haven't brought those numbers because districts have not spent as much time with them, and so they're generally less precise. But we do calculate those.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I've seen those at individual district levels, and for certain populations, they're horrific. And so I'm just curious why we wouldn't, so it's just a resource issue on the adult side then.
Yeah, it's just a matter of how many district data submitters they have to commit to this.
So what is it? Sorry, Nicole. This is Julie. I've arrived late. So what is it that the districts? Why can't they validate it? I mean, what's the process that makes it an onerous thing for them to
Sure.
report it?
I don't know how much detail you want me to get into, but over the course of about a month and a half, they validate records for the 50,000 students in each of the two cohorts. So that's 100,000 students over the state, plus an additional approximately 170 students in the dropout rate, 170,000 students in the dropout rate. And
So say if you had an individual school district and they had something like 200 kids drop out in 8th grade, what do they need to do that is time-consuming or an administrative hurdle to reporting it? Because I guess that seems to be sort of the worst thing kids dropping out in high school is losing them in 7th and 8th grade. So I'm just
yeah,
Do you have, I mean, basically for high schools, and I don't know what they do in 8th grade, but I think it's very similar to this. In high school, they have to determine where that individual kid went to. And a lot of times between the middle school transition, between middle school and high school, kids, the most at-risk kids are going to be moving out of district, which would then mean the district has to find where that kid went to, reconcile that record so that it didn't count on their dropout rate. Because it's not highly publicized, I would assume that they're not doing as much work. So if the emphasis of OEIB were to focus on an 8th grade dropout or a middle school dropout rate, that would change the conversation.
Well, I guess I don't see why we should be less concerned about kids dropping out in 7th and 8th grade than we are in high school. So it seems like whatever procedure that they do for the high schools is not only reasonable, but probably more urgent to do it at the middle school level, at least in my opinion. So.
And that's a policy decision that needs to be made. We implement whatever policies.
And who makes that decision? I mean, who could make that decision? Is that by statute that they have to do something, or is it a?
There's not a statutory.
there's a
requirement.
statutory definition of dropout, but it's a federal requirement that we calculate the one-year dropout rate.
Right.
I think it's at the high school level.
likely a state board
Yes.
decision. But I'm wondering, I know that for purposes of reporting at a district level or a school level, that the validation process is very important. But I'm wondering in terms of a statewide average, or at least information around subgroups, the data that you have, do you have a sense of the sort of margin of error or the reliability of it as it stands?
I would defer that to Isabella, but I doubt that we spend a lot of time analyzing those data.
Yeah. We know that districts do the best they can. We know that they focus on high schoolers because high school rates in the cohort specifically are what appear on achievement compacts and school and district report cards and factor into their ratings. And so that's where they're in some ways incentivized to spend their efforts. And it's also, of course, what we publish on our website. I don't know exactly what the error is, but I would imagine it's higher for the 7th and 8th grade than for the high school.
I think where you'll find the discrepancies are the fringe kids, the kids that are on a border, like between Portland and Vancouver. And if they move out of Oregon into Washington, it's harder to track those kids for individual school districts because we don't have a way to reconcile. If the kid from Oregon moved from one district in Oregon to another, we're probably going to pick them up on we will pick them up on ADM. If they drop out, we just don't know where they're going. That would be the responsibility of the middle school or the high school to find or track that kid from the transition. And really, it's a bit of a little bit of detective work on the part of the district to track these kids down.
So you're saying that if a student went from one Oregon public high school, middle school to another Oregon high school, but in a different district, you probably would be able to relatively easily validate that?
Easily, yeah, that one's a very easy reconciliation.
So it's just that they're out of state. I mean,
it's if they're out of state or they drop out of the 8th grade or 7th grade and move into their work or just totally drop out. It's hard to find those kids.
So I've got to think
Private
the percentage
schooling,
of kids who are actually leaving Oregon public middle schools and going to Vancouver is relatively small, so it seems like we should be able to validate it relatively.
So I think it seems like what you're asking us for is to do a little research on the transition kids from 8th grade. How many kids were in 8th grade and did not show up in high school in an Oregon public school? Is that kind of the question you're having?
Yeah, I don't want to hijack Nicole's question.
No, that's
so
fine.
Nicole, does that sound like what you're interested in? It sounds like, I mean, that's what I would be interested in knowing is what that looks like.
Isabel, is that a fair
Yeah.
question to ask?
It's certainly something we could look at.
Yeah.
Again, it would probably be an overestimate because of all the students who have moved to another educational setting that's more appropriate for them.
Yeah. There's also the privates and the homeschools that are a little, there are kids that move into those areas too. So, but we can certainly pull the numbers together and get those back so that you can see the impact or the severity of that problem.
I think that sounds helpful. In addition, I would wonder, the other appropriate place for this conversation may be in the context of the school report card conversation, as you were describing, Isabella, that, as we rolled out a new school report card, potentially there could be a conversation around adding a data point about dropouts in the middle school or a K-8 report card. So it's certainly a conversation that can happen. Do you have anything you want to add, Nicole?
I think I just cut somebody off. I'm sorry. This is Nicole. And I'm having a hard time following. I think that's Julia. Hello, Julia. But
Hi,
I
Nicole,
can barely
sorry.
hear Julia. So I don't know if you're all putting the microphone closest to the person talking, but I'm sure you had some very wise points, Julia. I just didn't hear them all.
Yeah, hopefully I was just agreeing with you. Nicole.
When I said wise points, that's what I meant. You must have been agreeing with me.
Okay, you did hear me. So can I just, Nicole, I'm wondering from this report, what particular action are you looking for, or questions, or how do you see our committee using this? I mean, whether there's things are getting worse for some subgroups, and where they're getting better, it's in a very incremental way.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. Like, one, I think there's acknowledgement that this is a little bit of a different format. So I think that's helpful. I mean, I'm curious if there's a plan to take this to the full OEIB as well. Seems like, this is very relevant for everyone. I'm curious about why it wasn't broken down per subgroup. I think that's, or maybe that was verbally talked about, but it's not in the slide deck. So that might be more helpful information. I mean, it really should be informing our strategic investments, I think, as well. And I think we should be looking at this and aligning it with our strategic investments, and not just, what I get nervous is some of the strategic investments are like these tiny amounts of money that are targeted at a specific racial and ethnic group, and I'm very concerned that the larger picture of strategic investments is not being intentional about how it's impacting or not impacting these populations who seem to either not be making progress towards improved graduation rates or we're losing ground with. So those are a few ways that I would look at it and think about trying to move the conversation forward, particularly as it applies to our out-of-school youth policy. What are your thoughts, Julia?
No, I agree. I think visibility at the full OEIB level, and how does it, I guess, how does it inform the underlying investments that we're making, but also from just a policy standpoint or what we're focusing on. I think what I heard about the middle school piece is if we're not measuring something or not looking at the data, then districts really aren't focused on it. So if even just asking, for example, for the middle school data, using it as a way to sort of sharpen focus on the issue so that we can develop strategies, I think would be a good place to start. I mean, I think this whole that and just the overall trend line should be used as a sort of basis for our conversations, because these numbers, like I say, in some cases they're getting worse, and other cases, and when they're getting better, it's only incrementally. So how do we get some, use either policy or investments to drive larger gains?
Excuse me, I don't know if I'm able to be heard.
Yep, we can hear you. Who is this?
Great. Hi, my name is Nick Mather, and I'm with Gateway to College National Network. We're based here in Portland, Oregon. And I just have a question, and if this is not the right time for audience questions, I'll defer to later. But I'm curious, based on the last two comments, if the board or the subcommittee would see value or have the ability to convene some type of a working group to spend a little bit more time on some of these questions. These are questions that certainly are of interest to our organization and to many of the organizations we work with. We work both nationally but also in the state of Oregon. And, I think that the question that came up from Nicole about whether or not there's another subgroup that's missing from this data because we haven't included in this report the 7th and 8th grade leavers, and then also questions about which strategies are best designed to stem the tide in particular places is something that requires a fair amount of study, and I just wonder if this subcommittee or the larger board would see value in convening some type of working group to dig into those questions.
So thank you so much for your input. We do generally hold public input till the end of the meeting just to give the committee members time to engage. But I will have us come back to that as a potential discussion point at the end of the meeting, and I really appreciate your input. So I think we should probably move on, but that we have an action item of asking ODE to look a little deeper into the data that they have, particularly around kids dropping out as they transition between middle school and high school. I think we have an action item of taking the full graduation rate and dropout rate data to OEIB, which we had actually planned for March already, so that's good. We can certainly do a more detailed look at subgroups. This slide deck was sort of meant to be a very high-level overview, but we can do more detail for the full OEIB presentation. And then I think you'll hear at the full OEIB meeting this afternoon an opportunity to talk as a board about what our sort of parameters, what your parameters and priorities are around the strategic investments for this round, and beginning to shift that conversation in a way that I think Nicole really gets to the heart of what you're talking about, which is how we really make those transformational and kind of consider the bigger picture. So there will be discussion about that today, and then obviously informing the subcommittee moving forward.
So one thing that I'd like to ask is, in the discussion about potentially reporting on the middle school dropout rate, I would like to hear from superintendents or principals about just why it's complicated, because I'm sure it is, and I don't want to. I want to be respectful that there may be reasons or considerations that we should take into account as we look at data. So I just want to have their perspective about why we're not currently reporting it, what are the reasons, why wouldn't we, what things should we be mindful of when we're looking at the data, just so that we've got a sort of district level perspective about that. Not as a reason not to do it, but just to understand better their limitations or reasons why they're not currently doing it.
Great.
I really appreciate that. I think sometimes it's more of a mind frame issue than a logistical issue. So if it is a logistical issue, we definitely want to be respectful. But it is just about people not thinking about it, which is typically what I experienced, then we need to change that, because it's certainly so much better to intervene in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, or even 9th grade, than it is in 11th or 12th grade.
Definitely. Okay, well, thank you very much. We really appreciate the presentation. And now we're going to move on to item 3. We have Iris Bell, who's going to give us an update on the Youth Development Division strategic plan. At the last meeting, as we talked about out-of-school youth, I think it became pretty clear that the work that Iris and her division at OEE are engaged in is aligned and critically important. So I will invite Iris to come on up.
Where I was going
Let's do this side table again. I think it would.
Yeah. Is there?
There actually isn't a clicker, but I can click it.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
There isn't a clicker.
You can give us that.
Well, good morning. I'm Iris Bell. I'm the Executive Director of the Youth Development Council. And my understanding is you all would like an overview of what the council has been working on. And so you may have the PowerPoint. Nicole, do you have that available as well?
I do. Thank you.
Okay, good. So I'm going to take you.
Checking. Hey, Iris, is that a public? Is that something I can share with others? By the
Oh,
way?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Good.
So I'm just going to walk you through this briefly and sort of give you some history of the council itself, and and then what our charge and our legislative mandates have been, and kind of bring you up to where we are right now. So we were established in House Bill 3231. Actually, we're actually established in House Bill 4645, but 3231 actually was the bill that took us and brought us over into the Department of Education. And in the process of bringing us and establishing us over at the Department of Education, we were also directed by the legislature to develop a plan for all of the funding that was sent to us out of the old Commission on Children and Families system. As you know, the Commission on Children and Families was abolished, and when they were abolished, two other entities were created, the Early Learning Council and the Youth Development Council. The funding that was at the commission system went to early learning and youth development. We then have been in the process of determining a funding allocation plan for those funds that would go out throughout the state and around the state to communities. And so what we have done is to work for the last, I'd say, 6 months or so on a plan. We can skip ahead here on a plan that would, yeah, that's the one I'm on a plan that would have recommendations. And so we went around the state, and what we were able to do was to go around the state and engage communities. And I'm not quite sure you all have seen this, but we do have a community engagement product here that basically shows every place we went in the state. We went over to Ontario, we went up to Baker, we went down to Pendleton and over Umatilla. We spent time in Deschutes, we spent time in Jackson County. We met with the tribes in Umatilla, Siletz, Grand Ronde, Cow Creek. So we met with the tribes. We basically made it around the state, and we engaged community. And when I say we engaged community, we met during the day with school districts, with stakeholders and nonprofit organizations, with the business community. And in the evenings, we met with parents. And so we would stay over and engage parents in conversations, and the questions that we asked basically had to do with how we would be supporting the Oregon Education Investment Board with respect to these funds. You know, what we should be doing to align with the national conversation about what's happening with young people, and then how should we look at the services, and how should we develop outcomes with these particular funds. And so we talked about, as we did this work, and as we moved forward with it, we met with, as we met with parents, some interesting things happened. And I want to kind of talk about that just a little bit. It's not in the slide. So the conversations we had with the school districts and with teachers and principals, basically, one of the things that really was striking that came out was the need for mental health and behavioral health services in schools. You know, no longer do they have child development specialists, no longer do they have even nurses, basically, in the schools right now. And so teachers basically are looking out into their classrooms, knowing that some of their students need some supports and some help with respect to behavioral health and mental health. But there are waiting lists in most communities. So you have your nonprofit behavioral health organization in the community, but there are already waiting lists for young kids and students in most communities. Some communities are actually busing their students to the neighboring community to try and get them some of the mental health counseling and services that they need. Parents were very, very supportive of before and after school programs. In many cases we heard, if it weren't for the Boys and Girls Club, if it weren't for Kids Unlimited, or if it weren't for a type of function in the community that had their young folks engaged both in the morning before school while they went off to work and in the afternoons after school. And during that time period, these young folks were fed, so they got their meals at these before and after school programs, and they also got educational supports. Most of them had computer labs, most of them had homework clubs, so these young people and children are able to receive these services. Very, very meager services in many of these communities, but the one Boys and Girls Club or the one after-school program that's available, parents are saying they cannot do without these kinds of services and supports. And so as we heard this, we were saying, how do we work this into the kind of formula or plan for funding that we would make available to communities? So I just wanted to make sure you all were aware of that. So these were the questions then that we asked ourselves, and finally we came up with, go ahead, you can move it on. We came up with this whole idea of, so who do we serve? Who would we serve with our with our funds, given that they're meager and given what we were hearing across the state. And so we looked at the national conversation that's going on around a group of young people called Opportunity Youth. And then we also looked at the conversation around young folks who are being called Priority Youth. Now, Opportunity Youth are those youth between the ages of 16 to 24. They are neither in school nor are they working. So they're being called in many instances idle youth. And in the slide, you'll see we have them kind of broken down into different cohorts in terms of ages 16 to 18, and older youth 19 to 24, and then some youth who are disconnected, who may or may not have a GED, and then some who have never gone to school or work after the age of 16. So these young folks are under-attached, they're idle, and they're not in the workforce. On the national level, there's about 6.7 million of these young people between the ages of 16 and 24. They represent sort of an economic impact and a social impact of about $7.3 trillion on the national economy. At the state level, which we're trying to sort of drill down into and see who are these young people in the state, 7 in 1 young people could be considered opportunity youth. And then we also began to take a look at another group of people that we're looking at called priority youth. And these youth primarily, and you see they as early as as young as 6 and up to 16. These youth are at risk of disconnecting. They're still in school. They're basically in the middle school years. Many of them are not making the transition to high school. And so these are the youth who need the supports that keep them engaged and keep them involved in school and keep them from dropping out. In many instances, as we went around the state, there were instances where the junior high school was right down the street from the high school. And yet these young folks weren't making that transition. They were not showing up for high school. And so again, the needs for the supports to be there that encourage and keep young people and motivate these young people and keep them going in a positive direction towards school or work is something we really, really need to focus in on if we're going to try and meet 40-40-20 goals. There's just too many of these young folks who are disengaging or are not engaged for us to be able to make those goals without their involvement and keeping them positively on a track towards educational success or to career success or employment or work. And so that comes then to our funding plan. So when we were looking at this plan, we said there had to be some foundational principles for it. And the first foundational principle had to be that a community is basically self-determined. Communities came together as we were having and engaging them around the state, and they talked to us about what their community needs were, what they saw in terms of some of the things that they needed support with or some of the gaps in the kinds of services that were in their communities. We also realized that our resources needed to be targeted at those most in need. And so we have, and you'll see in this presentation, developed what we call indicators of need. And so we're trying to move away from what we call a formula-based allocation plan to a needs-based allocation plan. In the past, with the old commission system, we had a 0 to 17 population-based formula. So based on the number of young people in your community from 0 to 17, you just simply got a chunk of money. And you were to do, good positive things with it. But it wasn't necessarily needs-based. So we've moved away from that kind of a formula to what we're calling a needs-based formula. And then we need to see that in the long term, the goal would be economic and social advancement, and that we would see that these young folks would be re-engaged and have an economic and social impact in their communities. And finally, we consider progress to be essential. We want to see outcomes. Again, another something that was a little bit more difficult for us to discern in the old systems were, what are the outcomes? What are the measurable performance outcomes that we get for the funding that we have, that we make available? So that was the foundational principles. And based on that, I think we come to, at the bottom of the page there, what we're considering to be our 4 grant fund streams. So we're having a youth and community grant fund, we're having a Youth and Gangs Grant Fund. As you know, the governor put some specific funding into our budget for gangs, and so we have what we're calling the Youth and Gangs Grant Fund. We also have a Youth and Innovation Fund. One of the things we heard as we went around the state was from many, many communities, if only we had, or if only we could, or, is it possible to get the books purchased, or is it possible for us to be able to get computers for our classrooms? All of these sort of one-time only kinds of needs that in these economic times are very hard to come by for communities because the grant doesn't allow for it. And so we thought that what we might do with this Youth and Innovation Grant is make available sort of one-time only requests from communities for some sort of infrastructure piece that would help support the work that they were already trying to do. I'll give you a good example. In one community, we had done a community visit, and as we were leaving, we passed a computer classroom. And there was a beautiful classroom. It had brand new computers, at least 20 to 25 brand new computers all set up around the room. And as we moved through the room and out, the director of the program had mentioned that they didn't have internet service. And so although they had these donated computers all set up for these young kids in the community, there was no access to internet, and they could not afford that internet connection. So really, those kinds of stories really compelled us to put together something called a Youth and Innovation Grant that could be used for those kinds of purposes. And then finally, we received some federal funding, and the federal funding is quite prescriptive. And so that fourth grant that you see called Youth and Crime Prevention Grant is actually the funding that we received from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And so we put that in our grant streams as well. I want to kind of move you through the next couple of pages here, past the individual grants with the amounts of money and things in them, because those are changing as we speak. We still have to get through our legislative session, so we still haven't really landed on what the amount of funding for those particular grants would be. But if you move, already look at that, Seth has gotten to the page, you've gotten to the indicators of need. These are the kinds of, this is this idea of a needs-based process as opposed to a formulaic process. So these are the kinds of needs, and there could be more, that we would ask the community to begin to take a look at as we begin to put together our funding plan. In other words, identify and describe for us through our application process the kinds of needs that a community might have. And what we've done very intentionally, when you take a look at some of these, whether it's attendance rates or dropout rates, or whether it's graduation rates in a community, if you look at the next page, we've made these outcomes and made the data readily available for these communities. All of this particular community level data, as well as the individual level data, is available to a community through the census, through the school district. So if you want to know what your graduation rate is, if you want to know what your attendance rate is, there's even a rate for idleness, youth idleness. So you could get and go. It's a census tract
How do they
measurement.
Like idleness? Is that not working?
Not working, not in school.
Okay, so it's a combination of some of these.
That's right. So it's basically, but and you can get down to a census area in a community and actually go with respect to the census data and find out what the percentages of young folks in a community who are actually idle. All of this readily available so that communities don't need to have researchers, they don't need to have evaluation specialists or anything like that to know and be able to access this information. At the individual level, you can also get pretty good data on what's happening in a community. And so we wanted to make sure that our application process was user-friendly, that the data was readily available, so that when folks came to us and said, we'd like to apply, we'd like some funding to address our attendance rates, they could know without having to go and hire someone. They themselves could know what that information is in their community. Now, one of the things we're going to do, and what we're planning to do, is to use a collective impact methodology here. Because again, we have meager funds and we want communities to come together. The council has chosen to use collective impact as a methodology for its process. And in a collective impact process, a community has to have a common agenda. For example, as I was saying, if they want to come together around attendance, then the community says, we want to tackle attendance rates and to bring the attendance rates up in our community. They have to have a common set of activities around that, and they need to have a common way that they're going to communicate that. And for sure, they have to have a common set of shared measurements. And what we mean by that is, as you fund activities in a community, and particularly when you take a look at community-based organizations, we tend to basically fund them separately and independently of one another. In this particular collective impact methodology or model, those community-based organizations would all be working on the same shared measurement, on the same sets of activity. They would also be working on that same common agenda. And so we would know that we would have the collective work of a community around a certain agenda. I always want to use Multnomah County's everybody reads kind of analogy here, where everybody's reading the same book. And whether you're standing in the grocery line or whether you're at the barber shop, if you're talking about that book, everybody's talking about the same book. And so what we're going to encourage here is a collective conversation about whatever impacts a community really wants to tackle. So going back to those indicators of need, we would select whatever area, dropout rate, graduation rate, attendance rate, ELL, whatever it was in a community that a community wanted to come together around, and you would collectively, using this methodology, actually begin to address that particular issue or concern in a community. And so what we have done is began to look around the state and to identify various places in the state for the trainings on collective impact. There have already been some. Eastern Oregon has been utilizing the collective impact methodology with several of their counties already, and down in Southern Oregon, they've been using collective impact methodology. So we've looked at this as a way to really bring communities together around a shared set of common outcomes and around a shared set of activities to achieve those outcomes. So that's the process that we're using with, and I think that's, we've come towards the end there. That's the process that we're using with respect to our allocation plan. Our timeline is varying because we're still having to get through the legislative process, and there are some who are not necessarily in favor of the process moving from a 0 to 17 formula to a needs-based formula. So we're kind of running into a couple of wrinkles there with folks from the old system who would much prefer the 0 to 17. But with that, I'll stop and answer any questions that you might have.
So I just have a question. Where do you think this, or where it has been successful? So is this organization, is the backbone of support, is that, are those nonprofits, community-based organizations? Are they governmental units, like you referenced the county?
The community self-determines.
Capacities.
Right. The community self-determines that. As you know, there are nonprofits who have the capacity to be the backbone, but you also have county governments who have been in the past the backbone. A community would self-select. And we would think that, and we would expect that in their applications, and again, we're having an application process, not an RFP process. Our applications will be anywhere from 5 to 7 pages. We already know who these young people are. We know who opportunity youth are. We know who priority youth are. And so they need to tell us a bit about what it is they're trying to do. But in that process, as the community comes together, which is the requirement, the community would self-select. And in many cases where you have nonprofits and or county government that are getting good outcomes, you would probably self-select. It would be wise to self-select those entities that are actually achieving good, strong outcomes and good, strong measurements in the community to be your backbone organization.
So Iris, this is Nicole, and first of all, I want to say I spent some time looking at this PowerPoint yesterday, and I was really impressed. Like, I have been sort of watching and waiting and really excited about where the Youth Commission is going, and I felt like this was one of the most exciting pieces of work I've sort of seen out of transformation. I did want to check a couple of my kind of assumptions along the same line of questioning that Julia had, and but my assumption before was that because there was sort of the formula, in some communities you had counties kind of partnering with nonprofits and doing really great work, and in some communities you had, resources going to sort of county government where communities may not have even known resources were going there, and it was sort of being used to, in some cases pay for parole officers, and sort of do all kinds of different things that really are not about prevention or youth-driven strategies, but really about the culture and priorities of that county and the needs. And so this really opens it up so that folks will have to really say what they're doing and allow for different leadership that's really outcomes-driven. So I just want to check that. That's what kind of made me excited, but I want to check my assumptions because I have a lot of them that may or may not be correct.
Well, yes, in this case, that particular assumption is correct. We are really trying to make this a community-based process, and prevention being a component of a community process. So we're talking about community-based prevention here, and we're hoping and suggesting through this particular plan that these funds are in the community and utilized by the community to maintain services and supports for these young folks in the community where they live. Now, some might say that the probation officer knocking on the door is a member and a part of the community, and we would suggest then that that probation officer come to the table in a collective impact methodology. We're not trying to exclude county governments, we're not trying to exclude juvenile departments or any other components of government that are there. We simply ask that they come to the table with the rest of the community, with parents, with teachers, with mentors and mentor organizations and the nonprofits, to really take a look at how they partner together to get the best results they can for these young people, and to help them and support them on their way to better and more successful outcomes. So we do tend to would prefer that these be community-based services and that these preventions take place in the community with community involvement.
So just a follow-up question, and this is kind of admittedly in the weeds. So I live in a county that used to, or probably still is at this moment, using money for probation officers, and I would bet a lot of money that if you talk to the community, that is not how they would want to fund. And so what recourse do we have or what recourse do you all have if, you are getting applications from county X, Y, and Z, and it really doesn't, feel like it may be reflective of that community impact need or strategy, but there's huge need in that community. So what are your thoughts about that? Is it just engagement or?
Well, no one single entity can apply. And so even a county government on its own couldn't apply for the funds. We would expect that even if a county government were to apply, they are applying again with a group, with a collective impact group. And so we would expect then to see, and we would question, where are the parents, where are the teachers, where are the nonprofits, where are the other community providers and other community partners with respect to this particular application. So we wouldn't want necessarily to see one entity or a single entity apply. This really does have to be a collective community effort. But again, one that involves government, one that involves school districts, one that involves nonprofits and parents at the table.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, because I know those questions were kind of loaded.
Well, we're having that conversation as we speak, and as I said, we have we are before the legislature tomorrow with another component of this in a House bill that would have us move further in the direction that we're attempting to go, but we may end up with some different outcomes.
So do you think the pushback is really about expanding the age of young people, or do you think the pushback is about the equity formula? Because
I don't know that it's based on the equity formula as more or less this formula of a 0 to 17 population. As you know, our legislation says we serve 6 to 20. So that's already our legislation. what's happening here is that a component of the old system that has had a 0 to 17 formula for almost 20 years, since the 1990s, is suggesting that we maintain that particular formula process for the distribution of funds, which ends up giving minimum grants to small counties and tribes. And so the tribes have traditionally received $50,000, $25,000 a year for their prevention efforts in their communities. And what this plan does, it opens that up. It allows the tribes as well as other communities to actually access all four of these funding streams, and gives folks much more of an opportunity to provide resources in their communities. And so there's where the equity comes in, because folks have an equal opportunity to apply for these funds where they have not had that ability in the past.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? So to implement replace the formula for the needs-based funding, that you have to pass a bill, or or is it a consultation, or is it
A bill at this point. So what has happened is that if you take a look at the first funding grant that I mentioned, the Youth and Community Grant, that is made up of two funding streams or funding sources from the old commission system. It's made up of our youth investment dollars and our juvenile crime prevention dollars. It's the juvenile crime prevention dollars that has always maintained a 0 to 17 formula that are in question. Juvenile Directors Association of Oregon has questioned our use of those dollars in the Youth and Community Grant process. And so as a result of that, there needed to be a change in some of the statutory language that would allow us to use a equity-based indicators of need-based formula as opposed to the 0 to 17. And that's where there's the wrinkle or the opposition.
So that if there wasn't legislative action, it would revert to the formula?
Exactly.
Versus shifting to the
Needs-based, exactly. So, thank you.
Well, I want to thank Iris so much for taking time this week. As you can probably tell, she's very engaged in the legislative process and very busy championing what I think is a very aligned vision, aligned with the OEIB and the subcommittee. So I want to thank you, Iris.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for this work. I know it has not been an easy road, and I think the product really is excellent.
Thank you.
Great, so we're going to move on to item 4, which is a follow-up conversation from folks who participated in the Portland City Club GED study. We have Melvin Odenor and Alexis Romanos. Go ahead and come up. We are having you sit at this sort of oddly angled table so that Nicole Maher, our chair, can hear you better on the phone. So this subcommittee heard from folks from your committee earlier, I think maybe November of last year, sort of twice, maybe, yeah. And now that the recommendations have come out, the subcommittee hoped that you could come back and talk a little bit about the recommendations and the findings, and in particular, sort of where you suggested that the Oregon Education Investment Board might be able to engage and be helpful, and so we look forward to just having a conversation.
Well, very good. I'll start. Melvin Odenor. First, I want to thank the subcommittee for taking the time and having me interested in this issue, and of course having us come back and talk to you a little bit. And I'm joined here, as you mentioned, by Alexis Romano. We're currently serving on the advocacy committee. As you might know, the City Club has a process where it establishes a research committee, and if the research is accepted by the club, then it becomes an advocacy committee, and I've been appointed the chair of that committee. And so, just a couple of words about the report that I just wanted to highlight. As you may recall, the report was focused on young people who've dropped out of school, ages 19 through 25. That's one of the things that we try to remind people when we talk about the report. And for the most part, the club's report picked up on the issue that was pointed out by the Secretary of State, which is that in order for Oregon to reach the 40-40-20 goals that have been set out by the governor, there needs to be a concerted effort and a plan put in place in order to reach that, at least that 20 part, for the dropouts. And so with that, what we'll do is we'll just give you a quick recap of our report. Now I'll turn to Alexis to talk to you a little bit about some of the conclusions.
So we have, based on our conclusions, 5 overarching themes. The first one being that the GED is not the same as high school diploma, but the 2014 GED revisions has a chance to demonstrate that it accurately measures college and career readiness. In our findings, we and spoke to a lot of educators who didn't believe that it wasn't enough and wasn't the same as the diploma. And the 40-40-20 groups the GED and high school diploma together in the 20%, which would assume that the GED and the high school diploma are equivalent. And at this point, it isn't. One of the things that the GED doesn't allow for students to do is to demonstrate soft traits such as social cues and social skills that are found in the high school diploma. And the GED now is going to be based on Common Core standards, and which will hopefully create an appropriate link between what high school diploma recipients are doing and what GED recipients are doing. But the experience isn't comparable, which is a lot of what educators are afraid of, is that those receiving the GED aren't getting the social and career readiness that comes with being a high school graduate. The second one is, if the new GED leads to college and career readiness, Oregon would benefit from helping more 19 to 25-year-olds who lack a high school diploma prepare for and earn the GED credential. A lot of our conclusions are based around it being accessible to the 19 to 25 population, whether that be more accessible to communities of color, communities whose second language is English, and really looking at how the state of Oregon can bring in the 19 to 25-year-olds and like where that catch can be, so that they are feeling more included in being in the accessibility of the GED. Looking at that. The third one is, Oregon should monitor the success of GED alternatives in other states, considering adopting them here and preparing for people who earn them to move here. So other states are going away from the GED and going to other state-based or other, privatization, not privatization, but other companies-based testing. That it's not that is also in line with kind of Common Core, but isn't in the same realm. And there was a belief that those people who are moving from those states won't have that new diploma, that new GED, recognized by the state of Oregon, so that they won't be able to attend community college, or they won't be able to attend four-year colleges in Oregon because employers and colleges aren't going to be recognizing those degrees, and that would then cause there to be a lack of higher education attainment.
So can I just ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to understand, are you saying that other states are creating credentials that are an alternative to GED? So you have a high school diploma, a GED, or X? Is that what you're saying?
So instead of having the GED, they're creating a test. I think it's called Access, and that would be in replace of GED. So because testing is now done through testing businesses. Other states have selected other alternatives to Pearson's GED to use those tests as their new GED, as they found it was more comprehensive or met more of their state education standards. So, but what is happening is that the states that are using that alternative test, they're afraid that states who are continuing to keep GED won't recognize that alternative test in states that are using the GED. So the GED in some states is being completely eliminated and is being transformed into another completely different test altogether.
So, can I ask another question?
Yeah.
So if you have this other alternative credential, are the community colleges and other state institutions within Oregon, are they adapting to that, or?
That's part of our conclusion and recommendations, is that if the new tests are all going to be following Common Core standards, that Oregon should then recognize this test as one that would meet the needs, the college and career readiness needs of Oregonians, that it would be the equivalent. And that if then we're all kind of raising the bar, then the community colleges should be able to recognize it. Because now the community colleges have to also now recognize our new GED as well.
So just last follow-up, is there one that sort of a lot of states are coalescing around, or is it different states are picking different tests? I mean, is the GED high school diploma or X, or is it X, Y, Z, and Z?
Currently it's X, Y, and Z. The state of New York has a different one. The state of Colorado has a different one. So other states are finding alternatives to the GED.
That aren't alike, necessarily.
There aren't alike in the way that the test is given and the program is performed, but hopefully the goal is that all the tests the content will be around Common Core. Yes.
This is Nicole, and I just want to confirm something. It looked like in the Full City Club report, and then I kind of followed up with some additional questions, that we didn't necessarily say, oh, let's look at all of our options and then reaffirm our commitment around the GED test that we use. I don't think as a state actually explored using any other one, so I would just say that that's an important piece, because we didn't, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, have like an intentional conversation about that, but I would concur that I kind of looked at all of them, I mean, they all are essentially focusing on the Common Core, so it doesn't, I think states were choosing what works better for them and trying to align around services and systems, but we did not have that conversation.
And I believe that was our findings as well, is that we just like we're going to adopt the new GED, but that we hadn't looked at alternatives as a state as well.
Right. And,
Correct.
yeah. And that's reflected in our recommendations as well.
So Nicole, I just asked Gerald Hamilton from CCWD, who is, I think, might have some information about whether our state did engage in the process around selection, and so I just give him opportunity to add his thoughts to the answer.
Well, I just wanted to put on the record that actually there was a presentation to the State Board of Education, and while I was actually on the State Board of Education, and CCWD at that time did recommend that we look at the GED primarily for longitudinal evaluation purposes. And at that time, clearly I think there was a need to review these other proprietary tests as they became aligned to Common Core. But at that time they were not. So the issue was, and I think the State Board at that time reaffirmed the use of the GED simply because there wasn't an alignment yet, and there wasn't that process out there at that time. So there has been some conversation.
And when was it?
You remember, Dave, when you came, it was April or May of last year.
2013.
2013.
Thank you.
And was anyone involved in providing GEDs to 15 to 18-year-olds involved in that conversation, or was that exclusively a conversation with the folks who are just doing it kind of at the community college level?
I'm not sure I heard this, Gerald. I'm not sure I heard the entire question, but I think that was mostly some research that had come through CCWD, but I'll let David might have some more comments.
Nicole, this is David Moore from CCWD. Can you restate your question, please?
Can you hear
I'm
us?
sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
Oh, I'll go ahead. I'll go ahead. They just asked me to restate your question. So she was asking if, when the state board had that conversation, whether there were folks representing the interests of students aged 15 to 19, or whether it was primarily a community college based conversation.
When the state board made the decision, the state, I'm talking, I think we're talking about the representation of the state board being representing the K through 12 population comprehensively. I'm not sure I'm understanding the question, Nicole, I'm sorry.
So there's multiple types of programs that offer GEDs. Community colleges certainly are a really important player and provide leadership there. But then there's other groups who have historically offered GEDs to high school age folks, both profits and school districts, and the expertise and strategy for 15 to 19-year-olds is quite different than the strategy for adults. And so a conversation, I'm just curious, in that conversation, if any of the leaders and providers for 15 to 19-year-olds were engaged whatsoever.
The answer is yes, now that I hear and understand the question, Nicole. We have 47 test centers in Oregon. A number of those are community college based, a number of them are community based, a number of them are high school preparation programs, high school testing programs. We have a very, I think, vigorous high school options program, GED options program in Oregon. 31% of the Oregonians who earn a GED are ages 16 to 18. So I think that conversation enfranchised those groups that represent that population of students.
Yeah, I think
Okay, thank you.
you can go ahead and go back to your findings. Thank you for allowing us to
Very good.
engage in discussion around it.
So I guess our last two would be that Oregon has not prepared sufficiently for the 2014 GED revision, and that state funding and coordination of GED services are inadequate.
Yeah. Very good. And so based on the conclusions that the committee came to, we made what we summarize as 8 recommendations, and as you've pointed, and I'll just go through them very briefly, and then we can talk about the ones that focus specifically on the Department of Education and the Investment Board. The first one was basically the Department of Education and the Oregon Investment Board engaging in a public outreach process designed to educate the community, diverse communities about the new GED, so that people understand what it's all about, what the new system and the costs and those sorts of things. The next 2 recommendations focus on the issue of funding, and the number 2 is have the chief education officer develop a coordinated funding and strategic framework across all departments that focus on GED prep, testing, soft skills, and the wraparound services that we believe are important that go along with those, especially, which are particularly important for folks who are in the ages 19 through 24, 25. As well as having the legislature identify dedicated funding to subsidize the GED-related issues, including testing. Our 4th recommendation was related to the Oregon University system, and as you may know, you can enter college with a GED, but it's a score. You have to have a certain score, and so one of the things that we found was that the system had not announced what those scores were, and so one of our recommendations was that they would identify that starting with 2004.
And make it accessible. Like if you currently go into the admissions page, how you enter college, at least at using the U of O page as an example, how you enter college with a GED is a hyperlink at the very bottom of the page that goes into another hyperlink that is explained in non-accessible language. So it doesn't tell you the score or how you actually need to be able to access GED in a way that will allow you to attend school. It just says that you need to be able to have the right scores. But it's a page that is links you to the Pearson website and how you can start to, if you are in the path of GED, like what you would need to do to get admitted into U of O, though it doesn't have any specific language around the difference between a high school diploma or GED admissions, and is kind of a very topsy-turvy kind of access to it. So going on to any of these university websites, you wouldn't be able to, unless you know what you're looking for, be able to see that you could attend university with a GED. There's nothing that says that you can, except for a small hyperlink at the bottom of the page.
So like in theory, you'd have, currently it says something like, if you have a grade point average of X and you're a high school graduate, you're automatically entered. It would have, if you have a 3.5, if you have X GED score or X
Yes.
SAT score. So is that what?
Yeah, so it says the admissions requirements, and it gives the admission requirements if you're a high school diploma receiving student, and then it gives like what you need to turn in with your application and whatnot, and at the very bottom of the page where it says like about us, careers, whatever, U of O, then at the very bottom of the page it says click here if you're a GED student. You click on that, and then it shows, and then it brings you to the Pearson website, but doesn't explain to you what that actually means, how you go about getting a GED, or if your GED is from the previous year, if that works, continues to still work. So there's not concise language about the difference between a 2013 GED and a 2014 GED, and looking at universities kind of dedicating the time and energy to put that on their own website, not just a link to another website.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering with the and it may be in your full report, I apologize. With the transition of the GED to a new test, is there, I know as we transition to Smarter Balance, there's going to be a few years before we really understand the comparability and are able to make a determination about what a score signifies college and career readiness and whatnot. So I'm just curious if the new GED, would universities and community colleges have the information they need in order to make a determination about the level of performance on the new GED already, or is that something that will need to sort of play out over time?
I think that's an interesting question, because one of the things that Pearson has made a point of saying is the GED is normed to 12th grade graduation, right? It's going to be normed that way. How they would do it at a time when we're in the middle of a transition to the Common Core and no one has graduated with that yet, don't know. And so, to what degree the admissions people are able to identify what an appropriate score is, I think that requires a conversation between they and Pearson to really identify what they mean.
Especially since also Pearson is now doing a GED or a GED Plus, and the Plus is supposed to help with those soft skill equivalencies, so allowing for you to take an additional study load and test to kind of show that you are college and career ready. That also is looking at whether or not that's, like, is it the 4.0 equivalent, or is it now on a 5-point scale? Like, where is that plus equivalent? Like, where would that the equivalency be for that? And
this is Nicole. I'm sorry, did I just cut you off?
No, go ahead.
I think that's a great question, and I think it's a great question because I think that's like a great example of an excuse that universities will use as a reason not to sort of move quickly on this. But the reality is with the new test now in 2014, by all accounts, it's actually more difficult than the previous GED. And so I guess I would expect, I mean, since universities now in theory allow folks with a GED to apply even though it's not clear how, I mean, if students pass this GED, it's a more difficult prospect than passing it or so, even though we may not know all the details. In theory, it shouldn't be an issue unless universities made it an issue.
And we think that's right. I think one of our committee members, Alex and I both served on the research committee as well, in reaching out to the university system to get some information about that. I believe the response they got was, what now? GED's changing, 2014, and so we figure that they have some things to work out, a few kinks. So the next recommendation that we made was on the issue of analytics. So we believe that officials should collect information about the GED so that we can see how well it's doing in determining college and career readiness, which is one of the things that they boast, and that should be done and then reported back to the people of Oregon so that we can see if that's real. Our next recommendation asks for the governor to direct the Department of Administrative Services to prepare an annual report on how funds are being used, state funds are being used and allocated for GED testing and other support services. And then, because just going back to the earlier conclusion that we had about all of the different systems of testing that are happening throughout the country, that Oregon should take a fresh look at the other alternatives in a few years. You talked about the transition to the Common Core for those, to see if another might be a better system for Oregon, particularly given some of the barriers that we identified in our report, the cost, computer use, those things like that. And then our final recommendation is basically more of a housekeeping, because and that recommendation is basically to have the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate to direct Legislative Council identify places in statutes where there may need to be some changes from GED to a broader reference to equivalent types of programs.
And then this recommendation, the name of the two other alternatives are listed as HiSET and TASC, which are alternatives in other states.
So I guess this is the first time I realized that GED was actually a test provided by Pearson.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, I thought it was I don't know, something that was created by educational institutions. So it's I mean, the comparable would be, it's like an SAT test that's provided by the College Board.
Yes.
Yes.
Pearson, Kaplan,
And these other ones that are listed here, are they created by a private company or?
Yes.
If I may, they are the other two tests are McGraw-Hill and Houghton Mifflin.
Yeah.
That created the other two tests.
Which are also textbook
Right.
companies.
So I'm
And
just
curriculum.
curious that there's never been, I mean, it seems like this is almost like the high school diploma is a sort of state-created or created by educational institutions versus a testing company. But why that's how it developed? For some reason, I don't know, it just doesn't seem like it seems more driven not by student need, but maybe by other things, like maybe that's
Well,
wrong,
in the
but-
conversation with McGraw-Hill, they had stated that because they are creating the textbooks that so many students are learning from, that they could then best provide a test that was around that learning, since they create the textbooks that are in the classroom, so then the test would be equivalent of what the children are learning, as this has to be around their own curriculum that they've created. That's their argument. It doesn't include
Yeah, I guess I would
educational
just be-
factors, but on paper, that's what they're saying.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, the school systems at whatever level are creating the standards for performance for the students, and then the private sector is creating the books to train the students to reach the educational standards, and then someone says, okay, now take a test to see if you've actually learned it. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm not sure, but I think it's, I guess that's just how it evolved. But it's a little bit concerning, just like when you look at the over-reliance on like the SAT for kids to get into college, that it's, and then all the things that generates the SAT prep classes and the whole set of other.
You must have a high school student.
How could you tell? I have two new college students and a high school student. But I guess that concerns me in that it's driven by something maybe that's different from what, so for example, if you have a test that's based on using the theory of the textbook, the test is based on their textbook, so what if you have a different textbook? Are the kids going to be prepared and able to take that?
At some level, I think the transition to Common Core makes it actually, I think in some ways it makes it a little less problematic than it probably has been for the last 20 years. But I think it is concerning when you have a market-driven forces behind the alternative for students.
I just might comment, there have been efforts over the last decades, and for those of us who've been in for 40 plus years, to do a more alignment to high school graduation. For example, they did a similar recertification in 1992, if I'm at the time when I was in charge of the TV program. So you're right, it is a national test, similar to what you're describing in your assessment is very accurate. There have been some efforts by the company to elevate the test and to align the test with a set of outcomes that at least allegedly mirrored high school graduation in the past. Now, and I think we're all pretty excited about the next move to Common Core, because I think that'll allow us to really do an alignment that makes sense.
Okay.
This is David, and I just wanted to make two comments. One, I think the other aspect of the GED in terms of federally and the financial aid requirements that are out there. I mean, right now the FAFSA, which is what students will apply for in order to obtain financial aid, the GED is one of those requirements. And so I guess just keeping in mind in terms of whatever tests or whatever different methods that they need to meet the federal requirements for the FAFSA, because that's how a lot of the students are accessing financial aid. I think the other comment, and it's more regarding the conversation earlier that we were having around the Oregon University system and the admissions process. One of the standards, just being an admissions counselor, is you have your requirements out there, and that's what you would present to the students. If students didn't meet the requirements, then you'd want to have a conversation with the student and let him or her know about the different options. So in some cases, that step, that conversation was where the GED and the other ways that a student could enroll at the school would be informed. Because a lot of times, if the information is just put out there, very just a list of things that may not resonate with what's happening with the student and what's happening with the household. And so in some cases, the strategy was you presented, these are the standard requirements. If you don't meet these requirements, then let's have a conversation and be able to talk about the different options that are out there. So I just sort of put that out there as more context.
Yep. And so now, if we could, we'd like to move on to the response. Your other question was, what's been the response to the report? There's, we want to talk about the City Club.
Okay. So about 2 weeks ago, City Club decided to vote in favor of 223 in favor and 11 against, with one abstention, to approve the study. And so during the vote, a lot of these, the questions of privatization of things, many of the concerns that we're having here at the table were the concerns of people who of city club members, but in general, most city club members voted in favor of it.
Yeah, 93.5% in favor was the vote. In addition to the response from the city club members, there have also been recently a few articles that are op-eds that have been written about the GED and that have referenced our report. And what those articles have said was we should focus on getting students a high school diploma. That's the best thing for them. And to which the city club committee member said, well, yes, of course, that's what we said. The focus should be on high school diplomas, but for those who are no longer able to get that diploma because they've aged out, the GED is an option that we support moving forward with. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to ask a question because I think it hits on a nuance that David just brought up, which is what do you think is the right balance between ensuring that we have the GED available as a supported option and promoting the GED in a way that might end up having an adverse impact on certain communities, or that might be counterproductive to the efforts that the state is trying to move forward?
Well, I think that one of the things that we've had in our conversations is the need to constantly remind folks when we talk about the GED that the diploma is the best thing for anyone who is under 18. If a diploma is still within your grasp, you should grasp for it. Beyond that point, your options are you need to get a GED in order to make yourself eligible to participate in apprenticeship programs, apply to college, you get financial aid, admission to college. It's a second chance to have a door open for you to a better future and livable wages. That's the balance.
Up to, what is it?
High school diploma, then GED.
You know, it's up to, I guess it was up to 335,000 Oregonians without a diploma. Like, yes, high school diplomas are best, but how do we make it so that that 335,000 of Oregonians who are without diploma and are from 18 to 65, 70, how do we reduce that number for future generations so that 18 to 25-year-olds are new people who don't have a diploma? How do we make that, in Oregon, how do we reduce that number of lack of education? Like, looking at it kind of as a domino effect that, like, unless people are getting their, if we're not promoting the GED in some way, then that 20% is not, of the 40-40-20, the 20 is not going to be able to be reached. That there has to be an educational option for them. And so that the overarching effect of it is kind of important.
Okay, and so now, if you like, we can talk a little bit more about those recommendations that I think we would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 recommendations that really focused on at the state level, specifically, you know, the one related to public outreach. We think that, I mean, given where we are, the test has gone into effect last month, January 2nd. We think that there should be an effort to really promote there should be an effort to reach out to the communities and let them know about the changes to the test. Obviously, we're beyond the point where we can talk about, you know, if you've taken several of the subparts of the old test, you need to finish with the balance before December. That conversation is over. Now, anyone who wants to get it, who needs to get a GED, needs to start looking at what the new test requires and what it portends in terms of providing for, as Alexis mentioned, the GED Plus, which, you know, I think we're still, at least in my mind, I'm still thinking about that issue of how do they norm it to high school when no one's finished yet. But it's something that they're selling. But some of the good things about the GED that they promote is the ability to see how you're doing on particular parts, to fine tune your own practice in order for you to improve, to make the best use of your time in preparation is really one of the things that they promote. And so we believe that the Department of Education is in the best position to make it a statewide effort of getting the word out there about the new test and what it has to offer students. The other recommendations about coordinated funding. One of the things that we've discovered during our research was the fact that the funding for the different aspects of what we see as the different aspects of pursuing a GED are not coordinated. So, for example, there are some students who may be going to alternative schools or participating in other programs where they're pursuing a GED might happen to also receive some support because they are a single parent, but not necessarily because they're pursuing a GED. And so, but for the person offering the test or offering the training, also providing or having a connection to DHS support people, there may not be that connection made to potential GED candidates that, oh, if I pursue a GED, I could also get childcare for while I am going to the training sessions, or, oh, I might be able to do some of these other things that will make it more likely that I will be able to not only study for the GED, but successfully complete it in a in a reasonable amount of time. And so some coordinated funding we think would help with that, in conjunction with a strategy that says these are things that need to happen in order to make this an easier route. That's our recommendation. I'm sorry, you look like you had a question.
I was agreeing.
Okay. I think that the other piece of it, our number 6 recommendation was about the Department of Administrative Services and their annual report. That's as we mentioned, Pearson is promoting this system of analytics, and our understanding is that that was one of the requirements of the state, that they provide some sort of annual reporting. And so it would be our hope that during that process, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. There's the Department of Administrative Services would do a report about state funding, and I think that's the piece that's missing. So if we can get some report about how those funds are being used related to the GED, I think that would be great. And then obviously there's the look back opportunity, recommendation number 7. I think that we've got a couple of years to work on that one. And then the legislative council piece, I think that's a phone call. So we're happy to answer any questions about any further questions about the recommendations. And we can talk to you about our next steps.
Nicole, are you still on?
I am. So I think that I'm so excited about this work, and I definitely sort of sit from the perspective that, I too would like every Oregonian to get a high school diploma, but the reality of our current dropout situation and push-out situation and our current number of folks without a diploma, we need a strong, viable option that is coordinated across systems. And so I'm very appreciative of City Club and this group for doing this research, because I feel like it's been highly vetted. It's been really thought through from a statewide perspective. And I would propose that we, as the kind of equity committee, really look at their overall recommendations and maybe adjust them to fit our policy role as the OEIB, because we are not the ones on the ground doing the work. But if we could think think about how to take that language and use it for the GED section of our overall policy, I think that would be ideal. And I think the purpose of bringing them today was to really have deeper level discussion and hear from other committee members about their comfort with that strategy. So if you recall, our overall out-of-school youth policy has kind of 3 areas. One has a specific focus on, what's our path and perspective on GED, what's our path and perspective on youth in other systems such as OIA, DHS, etc., and then another path around, other positive options for youth. So this would really help us have kind of a vetted set of policy recommendations that have really done the research. So I'm curious from Julia and Whitney and others what their comfort level is with taking these set of recommendations and amending them for our needs in this overall policy statement.
So I would be supportive. I think the one thing, just from a sort of organizational standpoint, my assumption is that for youth who are still high school age, I guess up to 19, I would think we'd want to be coordinating with the state board. That's sort of in their bailiwick still, and then OEIB as, because I don't see maybe a home for students who are older than 19, because I would say that it's not going to be in HEC or, one of the other boards, or
Currently in CCWD, I was actually curious about the recommendation that it be coordinated between OEIB and the Oregon Department of Education, since currently Community College and Workforce Development coordinates and has many community colleges are providers, particularly for that over 18. I don't know if there's.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that it has where it has its home. I think OEIB is a good place, but also.
You then I'd like that.
If I may, I might be able to help you see some overlap. One of the things that we identified during the course of our research is that school districts have the option of providing funding to students through age 21. Portland Public Schools does that, and when students leave their building and go on to, I think, community college as well as some of the alternative schools, that funding that they're able to provide through age 21 can follow them. But many schools do not. They opt not to go up to 21. They may cut off at
About
19. And so there would be that overlap. And so I think kicking it completely to CCW would be a disincentive for schools to continue to do what PPS does, which is provide some support funding, provide that funding through age 21.
There are a couple of, I think, intersections, and sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. A couple of intersections in my mind, having been both the K-12 world and the community college world. Certainly, the GED options allows K-12s to do prep. We just have to realize that to actually take the test, the student has to be released from compulsory education. The 16 to 18-year-old has to have a release from compulsory education to be able to test. They don't have to necessarily have that to be able to prep. So there are lots and lots of school districts who do expanded options and do the GED prep. So the question is, where does that line drawn? And it has traditionally sat at CCWD and community colleges because, again, almost just under 70% of the people who take GED are adults. And so there is an intersection, I think, at that level, and that was something that's been around for quite a number of years, since the early 2000s, the GED options program. I think, I agree with the conversation. I guess the last thing that I would suggest, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but as we said in our presentation, we don't even know who the providers for GED prep are. We do not have that information. So if we're looking at a policy recommendation around how do we register or how do we receive information on who provides that preparation, I mean, we would love to be able to do professional development around the new test when we get that information, but we cannot now even invite them to the table. So I don't want to take a set another round over, but that was just another.
I think that's a great point, because I think the recommendations around funding are strong and should be considered as, you know, investments to really achieving sort of 40-40-20. I guess one thing I'd be concerned about, just having been through the recent, personally, I mean, it's a machine, these tests and the prep and, you know, getting the passing scores. I guess I would be concerned that we're not fueling the machine versus that we stay focused on having the resources really targeted at getting students ready versus fueling a machine that seems to get a life of its own, and that kind of, I think really diminishes the sort of free public education,
Yeah, I really support that, Julie. I mean, I don't think we're talking about funding Kaplan prep for GED. I do think, however, there's a problem with when, like, I'm very familiar with what happens at PPS, and the data pretty much speaks for itself. Students are released, they're then sent to PCC. Portland Public Schools actually pays PCC to sort of support those students in getting their GED. And I mean, the fraction of kids who actually complete the GED is pretty embarrassing. And the ways that you see students actually really completing and doing it at a high rate are more like programs like POIC, which is a nonprofit that does kind of wraparound full services, preparing the student, and kind of they basically raise money and then work as that alignment system. So you definitely see, and they have a high school diploma option as well. Ironically, they've been really discouraged from doing GEDs, although it's because of sort of popular education perspective. So I totally do want us to be careful that we're not looking like we're going to, you know, sort of fund corporate test preparation. But I do think we need a very different strategy with 15 to 19-year-olds than release them from school and send them to community college. The community college is not prepared. It's not fair to the community colleges, and it's certainly, you know, not fair to the kid. And you know, the examples I'm talking about, the funding actually is following the kid, but it doesn't work at all. So I think we can recognize that maybe we don't have a list of all those folks who are doing this work, but we should figure out how to resolve that, because it just feels really unacceptable that we don't have that level of coordination.
Yeah, I think we're in complete agreement. I want to be mindful that we're focused on students and getting them what they need, because you easily could create a whole industry.
And I think people are between a rock and a hard place, because what David said is that you need a GED to get financial aid, and if you get them, and for so many kids, I work in wraparound services, the option is to get a modified diploma. But if you get a modified diploma, you're not able to receive federal financial aid. So your option is GED. Like if you want to get a diploma, but you can't meet those criteria for a general high school diploma, your option is a modified diploma. But then at that point, funding your education has stopped there. Like you would have to pay for it completely out of pocket with a modified diploma. You can't receive federal financial aid, but you can receive federal financial aid if you have a GED. And so kind of figuring out where you are on feeding that, you know, franchise versus the other, like the kind of the mini option in between a high school diploma and a GED for some of these kids is a modified diploma, but then they aren't able to then get into, have their college be paid for.
So is there, I mean, this is Whitney, I'm just throwing out an idea. I mean, it seems in some way that, I mean, a recommendation around the state's ability to receive information around GED providers, and then I'm kind of in my mind analogizing with the work that's happening in early learning around, you know, beginning to ensure that the providers who are receiving state money are quality. So it seems like we might think about some kind of a recommendation around an accountability and quality assurance system, because obviously an investment, again, I think you want to have a system in place where you're sure that the state's investment is going to be investing in a high quality experience for students, and if there's no connection between providers and the state, then it's not, there's no guarantee. You trying to say something, Nicole?
I'm trying. Can you not hear me?
Well, we can now.
Okay. I just really support that recommendation, and I think it would help align other folks because, like, in philanthropy, we have an economic opportunity fund, and about 50% of our applications are from community-based nonprofits trying to fill the gap around GED completion because it's such a high priority. And I suspect that a vast number of those nonprofits are struggling to align, and so something like this could be very helpful for those in the community doing the work directly, and we would have a better sense of where to make investments in as well.
Yeah. And if I may, I think one of the things that Pearson has represented is you'd be able to judge the quality of the test prep locations based on how well the students are doing with the analytics that they would provide. That's been our understanding.
That's going to be helpful, absolutely. Because we have not had that ability.
Oh, and we are not here to market Pearson. That is not our job.
Thank you. Well, did anyone, Nicole, did you have some closing comments that you want to make? We're just about at time, but I'll give you the last word.
Sure. Well, I want to thank all of our presenters. I think today was a pretty full, pretty interesting agenda and a great use of time. So thank you, Whitney and David, for putting together the agenda. And I think I need the nod from Julia to sort of support David and Whitney and I to kind of think about inserting some of the GED recommendations in the policy piece. I think we'll need to change it again to maintain our policy rules. But I think that's our next best step.
So you're getting a nod here, Nicole. And I guess I just want to echo thank you for the City Club and all the people who worked on this. It's great information, and I hope that you stay partners with us
Yes.
as we implement, because you obviously have a lot of information, background, expertise that we'll benefit from, and I think the students will as well.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna hang up. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Nicole.
We'll
Thank
hear me
you.
this afternoon. Okay, bye.
Just right before we adjourn, just to say we'll be sending out some information. I think we're going to be changing the meeting date. It's not working well for a lot of people, so we'll be sending that out to you, Julia.